So this morning I had a pretty wacky conversation with Rival Voices. For those of you who aren't familiar with him, Rival Voices has been on my talk show before. He tweets a lot about psychology. He's involved in a bunch of cool projects, and on all these topics, he tends to get into them in a particularly unique and weird way, but cool way. So in this particular conversation, we discuss ways that we sort of use concepts against our best interests. And that's a little bit abstract, but we're going to go through a bunch of examples. And overall, I really had a fantastic time talking to Rival this morning, and I think you'll enjoy this recording of that conversation as well. So without further ado, let's jump into it. Do you feel like the people that you want to be oriented on the future in the right way are oriented on the future in the right way? Because I feel like shit's all over the place. And obviously, this is a humongous question that spans like the entire globe and every interesting person. But that said, taking that massive scope into account, do you feel like we're going in the right direction?
Um, yeah, I think I have an esoteric view on this. Same way I have an esoteric view on a lot of things. So I think in the past few years I've moved away from thinking globally or in terms of the world, um, which I think I think the concept the world serves more as a symbolic something that technically is a symbol and that presumably should only dereference to the actual globe and people there and cultures and whatever you care about, but that seems to be treated as if it had um, its own independent existence. So I think there's something funky going on there. And then separately, I think people, who are somewhat intellectual by default or very quickly get thrown into thinking in global terms. And I just think I'm not smart enough to do that. And it might be that it's possible in principle. It might be that I'm more self aware of my limitations than other people. But I've started thinking and trying to diagnose Portugal in particular, and I'm interested in Portugal in particular. And there I have views about about how people are oriented or not towards the future.
So it sounds like, okay, so the first thing I got from that is that the concept, the world is a trap, something like that.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Like Venkat had a thing at a time where he said that saving the world was not even wrong unless there was like a fucking meteor coming or something. And yes, maybe like UFAI is a meteor or that or whatever, but it just has a weird feeling. Like it just feels slightly like a fantasy and not like something that's actually related to your everyday material existence and relationship with the things and people around you. Um, so yeah, I do think there's something weird going on about the world. I was talking to corporate or on Twitter yesterday, and he was talking about Lacan's big other, which is basic. So basically, the idea is people reify society into an entity, and then they feel judged by that entity. When in fact, if you and I are talking, and this wasn't going to be heard by anyone, it's literally just you and I talking, and that makes a lot more actions possible than if it were you and I and somehow like the watchful eye of society over us, right? And there's also like this idea of you can say that the average man is 5'2" or whatever, and then people get confused and they think that there is a man who is the average. Like no, it's just like it's a symbolic abstraction. And in the same way, I do think that the world both serves the purpose of like a symbolic abstraction that's supposed to just reference to like actual existing things, but then takes this like special place in people's minds and becomes the sort of attractor for all kinds of feelings about oneself and things that one should be doing or ought to be doing and so on, that I think is like funky and weird. And when I think of like Portugal, it's like, oh yeah, Portugal, that's the place where I am, where the people that are around me are, the language that is being spoken. Like I understand the politics somewhat. I understand what's going. Like I can actually constantly dereference it to something that's right in front of me.
Right.
While if I think of the world, it's like fuck, like what the fuck? Like the world includes Africa. What do I know about Africa? Literally nothing. Like
Right.
what do I know about Asia? Literally nothing. Like right there's this. It's like I'm choosing to work with a map that's mostly blank, and that feels stupid.
And okay, so I've got like four directions I want to take this in. So I will just list them and then I'll pick one. So initially, so I think we can get to a state of being post that problem you described.
Hmm.
I used "we" here in one of those ambiguous social ways,
Yeah,
to
yeah,
refer to some extended category of people as in
yeah,
an aspirational way. You're
yeah,
with me,
yeah.
um, and that's one thing I am interested in talking about. Two is the quick thought I had is that what you're talking about with like Portugal being a concept you can work with more,
Hmm. Hmm.
versus the world. Um, it reminds me of like city states because reading history, you hear about all these politics they're doing, and it's like they're talking about Rome, right? And how
Hmm.
many people are actually involved in Rome? How many aristocrats are there? If you're talking about the people that are running Rome and
Yeah.
where Rome is like the center of the world, the next biggest thing it's like what, Persia, and it's like really fucking far away, and you're not really, it's the
Hmm.
other,
Hmm.
right? Modern Singapore, reading Lee Kuan Yew's autobiography has some of this feeling, this weird feeling of like civic engagement that's like more graspable. But the third thing was that you said the average person's 5'2". I don't think that that's true. I just
I don't understand American numbers. You see, but that's my point, right? I don't understand the American numbers.
oh, okay. Just wanted to check. Um, okay, just to be totally honest, also to the listeners, who are here spiritually, I feel like I know what you're talking about with this like etherealized concept thing, and I feel like that's just something we could drop into and talk about because that is such a useful idea. But I do sort of feel like I personally already kind of know what you mean by that. But
Yeah,
um, do you want to expound on it a little bit more, just so we can have that had, you know, have it be that was said?
yeah. We both have some sort of experience with the EA and rationalist communities, and like I do think that a thing you saw in both of them was people that were miserable, people who were given a narrative about why they were miserable that was very abstract. And I mean, praise is very strong, a very strong word, but it was very motivating to their very intellectualized way of thinking, which makes it so that they are not especially self-reflective in a way that connects them to this, like the actual social bonds around them, such that if they feel very bad, it must be that there's something very wrong with the outside or the world at large, and then you give them something, which is that kids are dying of malaria or the AI is coming. And I do think that you then, as people grow, see a bunch of people dropping from that as they actually, start working on the problems and figure out, oh, actually, this isn't solving, whatever is the thing that made me get here in the first place. Um, and so there's a weird way in which I think both that there is a tendency for externalizing your problems, making symbols out of things that shouldn't be symbols, and then like giving them almost flesh, and then using those as the cause of your problems. And I think this goes on at all levels, right? Like the reason that everything is bad is because of conservatives, like with capital C, or racism with capital R, or like etc., right? Like you create these entities out of symbols that should dereference to something, but then don't dereference to anything except you know an excuse for you to not face your problems, and your shortcomings. And then there's some institutions that spring around that to extract as much labor and resources from you as they possibly can. And then, you give them your life, and then they spit you out after a while. So yeah, so I do think that's happening at various levels. And so because I've went through that process, I've developed some sort of like immune system to thinking about the future or the world in ways that I don't feel are particularly grounded in my everyday experiential reality. Yeah, which is why, fuck, that's so annoying. I'm sorry that I went into a critique of the way you formulated your question, but I do think that's actually the way I think about it.
Yeah. I expected no less.
Yeah.
So I wanted to highlight one of the things you said just to restate it for my own clarity because it was interesting, which was the idea of. So first of all, there's the idea of. I keep thinking the etherealized concept. I think I got this word from
Mhm.
from Toynbee. It's like there's the idea of like the concrete, and then somehow the spirits arise from the concrete stuff and like become this
Yeah.
simple uh you know simple thing that's somehow graspable, even though it's like barely real, or like I guess you could go into the whole egregore thing, or whether it has some other kind of
Mhm.
strange reality beyond concrete reality, but at least its relationship to reality is questionable.
Yeah.
That's piece number one, is that concept. And then piece number two is there's sort of like an exploitation cycle that
Yeah.
you're talking about,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
societally.
Yeah, for sure. So I keep using this expression, which is that in Portuguese, uns a fome à vontade de comer, which means something like hunger and the desire to eat go hand in hand. So I do think that whenever you see these patterns, you then see people that figure out how to exploit these patterns. And I do think you just have cycles that basically are like this. So like to a large extent, the cult is just the cult leader using its members and whatever their narrative is to extract resources and amass more resources. And I do think that you could see various societal institutions as something like officially sanctioned cults. So that's one thing. And then on the first thing that you said, yeah, so there's something there that I both don't understand and seems very powerful, which is something like um, concrete, especially of the future, concrete visions of the future can act as a sort of shelling point that then gets everyone to act in a way because they believe that everyone else will act in a way because they believe, etc., right? This goes a few levels of meta. And then it just makes it so that everyone organizes their behavior in a way that actually causes the thing that first, which imagination first organized their behavior to begin with. And then and then you get into the interesting questions of like intentionality of those kinds of processes or whatever. But I do find it very interesting for sure, yeah, that those things become real in their organizing of human behavior in a way that then after causes them.
Yeah, I have a clip that I want to read really fast. So let me dig this out. The other day, Teddy Roosevelt read this quote out, a longer quote, and one part of it stuck out to me, and I wanted to mention it here. So I'll read it out loud because it seems relevant to what we're talking about,
Hmm.
and we'll see if it actually is. So this is from Chesterton, Everlasting Man, Chapter 7, The War of the Gods and Demons. Here it is. So he's talking about sort of the economic view of life as the economic way of describing like how the world works and the way it goes versus the sort of one based on feeling. Um, Turn the universe upside down in the mind, and you turn all the political economists upside down with it. Suppose that a man wishes to die, and the professor of political economy becomes rather a bore with his elaborate explanations of how he is to live. And all the departures and decisions that make our human past into a story have this character of diverting the direct course of pure economics. As the economist may be excused from calculating the future salary of a suicide, so he may be excused from providing an old age pension for a martyr. As he need not provide for the future of a martyr, so he need not provide for the family of a monk. His plan is modified in lesser and varying degrees by a man being a soldier and dying for his own country, by a man being a peasant and specifically loving his own land, by a man being more or less affected by any religion that forbids or allows him to do this or that. But all these come back not to an economic calculation about livelihood, but to an elemental outlook upon life. They all come back to what a man fundamentally feels when he looks forth from these strange windows, which we call the eyes, upon that strange vision that we call the world. So this might not have been the exact perfect quote for me to lift from that. The thing that made me think of it is just the idea that there's sort of the rational view of how the world works in a Cartesian, 3D Cartesian field with like stuff moving around and there's money and whatever. And we're sort of talking about a way that concepts take on a life of their own,
Yeah,
even and sometimes especially in the minds of the hyper rational,
yeah.
uh, right? Take on a life of their own beyond what is grounded there, and somehow, like you're saying with this cult idea, that the concept can be this sort of coordination object. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, I guess through which leaders of a certain type or grifters or whatever can move people around and get them to spend money and more.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I do think there's a lot here. It's like, you know, interestingly slash puzzlingly, um, the relationship of thinkers to thoughts hasn't been looked into very much. I think this is because, in general, thinkers tend to, kind of naturally, not necessarily consciously, but with some self interest, to overvalue thoughts and thinking. There's at least two interesting avenues there. One is something that I once called a theory engine, which is that the phenomenon where a theory that originally is meant to be descriptive of a phenomenon um, is adopted by sufficient people that they act in accordance with the theory as if it were normative. So one case where you have that is the Black-Scholes equation for valuing options, where they came up with this way that they think options should be valued. Then all of the hedge funds adopt it, and then in fact that becomes the way that, right. So like the descriptive theory then started being the engine that actually caused itself in a way. So that's one example. A second example I think is very interesting is the rationalists with the heuristics and biases program and rationality,
mm,
where it's supposed to be an abstraction of how a perfectly rational economic agent, which is not the same as a human, would behave. Then they take it as a normative ideal and value their behavior insofar as it approaches that ideal or falls from approaching it. And then they call the latter a bias, right? Which is then, and at some point you get really, really interesting, I don't want to say macabre, but at least manipulative stuff where the negative utilitarians sprung up the term life bias, wherein
uh-huh.
right people
Life bias. I
right.
never heard that before.
Yeah,
That's
yeah, 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 yeah. So they came up with it, and so you can see how this goes, right? So it's like you're already within the mindset where you think that ideally you should be a perfectly rational agent, and insofar as you're not, you're bad. And then someone enters your narrative and is like, oh yeah, but as a human you have a life bias, and that's the only reason that you prefer life to death, and if you didn't, obviously you would be a negative utilitarian like us. And this kind of argument will actually work on people, which I think is hilarious. So that's like one avenue that you could go. And then another avenue that you could go, I think that's very interesting, is that um, I think people frequently confuse the modality of their intentionality, by which I mean, I think people frequently confuse thought for reality and imagination for reality. One obvious example is dreaming, right? So it's not the case that, or that by default, as you dream, you're aware that you're dreaming. As you dream, often you think you're experiencing reality, right? It's a rare occasion where you realize that you're dreaming and it pops you out somewhat, right, into lucidity. And there's all of this Buddhist stuff about how all of this that we experience is Maya, is delusion, blah 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 blah, is actually mostly thinking. This doesn't accord with our naive intuition, where we believe that we're just experiencing reality by default. Even getting to the point where you have the concept of social reality is like a huge jump. And it accords with our latest years of neuroscience, where we have predictive coding that says that most of what we experience is our own model of the world being fed back to us at the conscious level, right? And there's a very tricky thing where when you think about something, you're not engaged in that something. You're not becoming one with the action, right? So like when you're driving, if a car approaches, you curl up because somehow your body has extended to become the car. But if you're thinking about your driving, then in a sense you're not there, and that thinking is painful and is suffering. And so in general, I think that people who think a lot suffer a lot, but then they try to think their way out of their suffering, but they can't because it's a performative contradiction where you're trying to not suffer via not think, and you're trying to think your way into not thinking, which obviously you can't do. You just need to drop it. But how do you gain the move of dropping it? And it's by recognizing that you have been confused about the intentionality or the modality of your intentionality. So all of that to say that like all of this, I think could be like a whole S area of like fucking, I don't know, science or philosophy or whatever, right? Where you study directly thought and thinkers' relationships to thoughts and like all of like sort of circular causality relationships that happen there. But no one is looking at this. And I think in part because, you know, you need to be kind of insane and do this for a few years to even start realizing that this is happening.
So then let me ask you, how do you think of yourself in this context as you're a thinker? We're here talking about ideas, right? We're not actually just vibing, right? We're not just sitting here and like feeling how we feel, you know, this morning or evening for you or whatever, right? We could just be having coffee and just like, you know, sitting, right? So
rocking out with our dicks out. Yeah, sure.
Totally, yeah. So I guess how do you fit into that?
Yeah, so I saw a
Like are you participating in the error of uh of creating thought in the world, creating ideas? Like it is, you know what I'm saying?
yeah. Yes, so definitely naively, yes. I think that what happens is when you're young, something happens where you stop trusting your implicit reactions to stuff. Because you do, you then need external models to evaluate how you should react to situations. And then that like turns into a lifelong obsession with thoughts and thinking and theories and frameworks and, you know, what whomever said about whatever. And so definitely participated in that and have been participating in that. Um, if there were a button where I could just touch it and not have to do that, I think I wouldn't, because I think I'm insane in a very particular way, which is that I don't want to get myself out of the hole, but I also want to get everyone else out of the hole that wants to be out of the hole. And I think
Bodhisattva motherfucker over here. Right?
no, but truly, because I was thinking, okay, like I think I'm like close enough. I could probably just do it. I could probably go to a few retreats and then just drop off. Why don't I do that? And I think that if you notice, like a lot of what I tweet is like, you know, X is the same as whatever else is the same as whatever else is the same as whatever else, where I'm trying to give people, if they already have a reference point, I'm trying to give them a translation key such that they can get all of the other reference points. Because I don't know, I fucking want to save everyone.
and so we arrive back at our original topic, which is, you know, the world, right?
Right,
Everyone.
but yes, but I have you know, a dereference intuition of the people that I mean. Like there are people that come to mind that I see on Twitter that, you know, obviously suffer in part because of how much they think, and I'm like, yes, you, like I want to fucking get the tools, pull you out, pull us out, like let's do it if you want. If not, it's fine. But yeah, I want at least to be able to. I don't know. Portugal is a very Catholic country. I was raised in a very Catholic country. Some things stick to your personality.
See, yeah. So I feel like that's a good. I mean, if I were to draw the theme, I think that, I don't know. Maybe we make this into a. I don't know what the current version of the, you know, broke, woke, bespoke, or the expanding brain, or the next. I don't even know what iteration we're on, but it's like, if you want to do good, maybe even doing good is a hairy term, but it sounds like doing it from a place of concrete, where you have concrete understanding. So I guess if someone heard that, they might think that what I mean is go work in a soup kitchen where you can see people face to face, rather than do philosophy on the internet.
Yeah. But okay, here's the thing. I'm there's a messianic flavor to the EA stuff and so on, where it's like, you are the one individual from SF or Oxford or whomever who has amassed a lot of resources and now, very charitably decides to distribute those resources to the people so that you can save them, which I think is very different from the flavor that I feel, which is I'm fucking trying to build the tools for myself that I can then distribute freely and people can use on themselves to save themselves. And then on the galaxy brain thing that you were saying, I do think that makes sense. I do think it's like, originally the mountains were mountains and the rivers were rivers. Then the mountains stopped being mountains and the rivers stopped being rivers. And then again, the mountains are mountains and the rivers are rivers. The thing is, for the people that I'm talking about, the mountains already aren't mountains and the rivers aren't rivers. And they're trying to get back, but they can't and they must push forward. By which I mean, they already broke somehow. And so they need to become aware of what the system is that makes mountains mountains and rivers rivers, which would have been transparent for you if it hadn't broke, but because it did broke, it isn't transparent anymore. And so you can't go back, but you can go forward. So you can rebuild it with the understanding of how it broke and why it broke and how it is built moment to moment. And that's like kind of where I'm trying to get and where I'm trying to pull people to. So, not as messianic, I hope.
So yeah, it's sort of like, the world with a capital W versus the world with a lowercase w.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, are you motivated by your relationship to a symbol that doesn't exist and is just a place for you to project your desire, or you can actually like name the people that you're concerned with, right? But this is old, right? There's a thing about the man that loves humanity but hates his neighbor. And it's like, right, like the idea of humanity is really easy to love, right? And there we get back to the thing we were talking, right? Because the idea of humanity, what is that? It's an idea. And ideas are really nice. You can spend days thinking about them. They never bite back. They never hurt you. Like, they're so sweet. You can do whatever you want with them. If you don't like a part of them, you can just imagine them to be something else, right?
Right.
It's like a physical other person and another being, right? I remember fucking seeing this girl. I think she was from Sweden, and there were some refugees there. And she goes and she gives them food. And obviously they're all starving. So they basically attack her to take the food from her. Right, which I am 100% sure is not how she thought that interaction was going to go.
Right.
But that's the thing. Like, that's harder to love than your idea of what they are and how they would be, where they just stand there so thankful for you being such a great charitable person, right? And if you can get beyond the hatred that reaction, that action initially generates in you, and then actually generate maybe even more feelings than you had for the idea because they're actually people, and so you can love them more completely than the idea, then I think that's the direction you should go. Do you know Ronnie Coleman's everybody want to be a bodybuilder, nobody want to lift heavy ass weight?
Everybody want to be a bodybuilder. Right. So nobody want to lift this heavy ass weight.
It's something like everybody want to save the world. No one wants to talk to the people that are actually around them.
Right.
Right? Because saving the world doesn't bite back. Like, you can spend your whole life trying to do that, and at no point do you have to question yourself as a person, because you are already good just by the fact that your intentions are good, and all of your actions get a sort of moral licensing. Where if you actually have to interact with the people around you, maybe they're like, yo, you're kind of a domineering asshole. And that's a moment for self-reflection.
Though also it sounds like you, in the case of, for example, the rationalists and the EAs, you believe that that state did bite back, but maybe not in the way that was expected. It's sort of bit back by people becoming alienated from their motivation systems and stuff like that.
Yeah. So in a way that's much more subreptitious and is hard to understand, that is caused by your plan or your intention. It's like, it's not that you're living a false life. It's just that you're depressed, or it's that you can't control your system one, or it's
Right.
that you can't align your motivational system. And it's like, no, you're living.
You have life bias.
Yeah, exactly. You have life bias. Yeah, that's your problem. Your problem is fucking life bias. Yeah.
What a fucked up idea. It's just incredible.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of ideas like that because it's like because people don't see ideas as ideas, and that means that that's a really really easy way for you to enter their system. So like I think I've said this before, but like microaggressions, I think it's just fake. Like they're not aggressions. That's why you need to put the word aggression on top of it, such that the thought, oh, but how could microaggressions not be aggressions if they're called aggressions, right? So there's this like use mention distinction where it is you can say what a thing is and you can like label it and put a name of it, and putting a name doesn't make it that thing. But like people aren't tracking this on a like normal fucking day to day existence because in general you try to name things in a way that makes sense, and you're not prepared for the fact that people are actively naming things in a way that will make certain thoughts easier for you and certain thoughts harder for you. And then again we go back to the thing of the study of how people relate to their thoughts and so on, and like it's precisely because there is no study of this, there is no available common knowledge, that this kind of move works. And it's a super precise, subtle, insidious, evil move, but it works.
Sweet. Let's. I think I have more than enough content. So, is there any final recap thought you want to give us? So, where I initially came at you with this, how can people orient better on the world idea?
I would say, fuck bitches get money. Do you know that? Like, I would reframe that and say, fuck the world with the capital W, get reference.
We might have to workshop that a little bit. Workshop a little bit.
I mean, I like it. The thing is, like, you need to understand that the words and the concepts need to match to something that you can, like, physically interact with somehow. Or they're just empty signifiers that someone is using to manipulate your attention and to drive your thought down particular paths.
You know,
Like, that's all that is, nothing else.
it's interesting because a lot of when you said that just now, like make sure that there's a reference, there's a way in
Mhm.
which that does exist in the canon of thinkers that a lot of, for example, like rationalist types, maybe not literally just less Wrongian rationalists, but like, normal academic philosopher types, it's in that canon. So, or
Yeah.
atheists. So, you know, uh, Karl Popper, right? All this stuff about like, like if God doesn't have a reference in the world as a term, then maybe it's just like not a thing, and you sort of limit the space of language.
Mhm.
I think it's probably in like Feynman. It's probably in like, I don't know. Is it in Carl Sagan? I don't know. I never read any Carl Sagan, but there's sort of a Emerson. Um, but wise men pierce this rotten diction and fix words again to visible things. Emerson's
Mhm.
not a rationalist type; he's a transcendental philosopher.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's the idea. So, what do you make of that? The fact that idea you just said does seem like it is kind of in the canon.
Yeah, yeah. So yes, I do think it is. Orwell wrote about politics in the English language and the
I
way
love
that,
that essay.
right,
Yep.
that language gets manipulated to make you, or basically on framing effects. Eliezer wrote, I think, 27 ways that words can be wrong, which is actually about ways that you can get confused in thinking using words. Um, I think in general, and the use mentioned distinction that I said I read from Hofstadter. I don't think it's originally from him, but he wrote Gödel Escher Bach, which was like very, the rationalists were very excited about it. That's some very old point. Um, so I do think the idea is in the water. I don't think it's given anywhere due importance. Um, I do think everyone like kind of slept on Eliezer's ways that words can be wrong. There was a NRX guy called Mian Draku, like something like that,
Hmm.
um, who had amazing analysis of this kind. The thing is, this actually takes work. Like this is an activity. It's not just an idea. It's not like Rocco's basilisk or whatever, which you don't think about, and okay, that's that, or you do think about, and that's that. But like actually dereferencing things is an ongoing activity of realizing that you thought you were thinking about something concrete, but in fact, again, you were confused, and it's not pleasant. It's not nice. It makes your thinking clearer, and it makes your action in the world clearer. but it doesn't feel nice the way that inside porn feels nice. And so I think it didn't sadly gain very much traction.
It's really interesting because I'm definitely not like hardcore trying to stand the rationalists here, but it is interesting because if you do look at Eliezer's writing, he has these bits where he did the whole rationality dojo fiction, where he would have Bai's jutsu or whatever, and you'd have this sort of image of this like future world where people would like train at these powers, and there were different schools of them, and they do all this cool shit. And it's interesting because something like what you call it the use mention distinction.
Mm-hmm.
The There's sort of like my take on it is the idea is in the water, but if you receive it in the way that you receive ideas, then you don't get it. We're sort of need to move basically into spirituality territory. The test of your reception of the truth is action. It's living it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think someone like Eliezer himself. A lot of things you can say about him, but I think he probably does get this idea.
For sure.
Himself. And then part of the work of, I think that we need a variety of types of intellectual and spiritual revival. And part of, to like sort of drum up my own project a little bit, part of why I want to have conversations like this is that I think you need to process out the concepts and sort of distribute these like micro insights, and they pass them on to someone else and they do it with something else. So part of the issue is with gurus, because Eliezer was a guru, and I don't mean that in a dismissive way, but it does connote some of the stuff, which is that the followers always get a leaky version of the thing. And so there's a way in which, Eliezer kind of like retreated to his mountain to do fan fiction and stuff. And then like a whole lot of people got left with this leaky version of this ideology, and they sort of got good stuff, and they sort of had to, work for themselves. I really shouldn't say this, but it's a little bit like, the despair of Jesus leaving the world, right? It's like, now here we are. Where has our Savior gone? What now?
With the difference that there was no Peter to build the church, right? Like it was just left to die. So as to your first point, so I do think that there is a circularity here where for you to actually get use mention distinction, you can't get it just as a mention, right? Like you need to actually get it by doing it, by getting it, right? And so there's a hard bootstrapping process there. So I give that. Secondly, I do think, for all his faults, Eliezer, got infinite funding for his thing, and infinite fans, and infinite followers, and probably a harem, and decided that he didn't want to be the CEO or whatever, and just wanted to do his research and found someone else. So like clearly the man is winning at life insofar as rationality is measured by that. I think he's killing it. I do think he's not a prototype or a prototypical example of the rationality community. I think most aren't in that position. And then I also do think, or even him, I think the last sequence that he wrote was on something like the art in the community, which was, now go forth and actually do something about this. Mm-hmm. And then when he wrote his Inadequate Equilibrium book, in the preface or the foreword, he wrote, with 10-year retrospect, I should have had more emphasis on actually doing things. And it's like, yes, like who would have thought that the community of thinkers and talkers would think and talk about doing stuff instead of actually doing stuff, right?
Right.
Which then again brings us to the thing about the relationships between thoughts and action. I do think that's a hard problem, and I'm excited that you're getting this going.
Taking a crack at all this stuff. We'll see how it goes. Thank you, Rival Voices, for this brief chat, and let's do more of these. This is awesome.
You're very welcome, Michael. Crazy.
All right.